Welcome back to the MWOD. Today we have a little bit of some hodgepodgey kind of things. We want to clean up some odds and ends of your mobility. One of the things we're going to work on today is thinking about kind of our analogy of shoulder and hip being analogous. If you could imagine that a human being is essentially two hip joints or two shoulder joints. And when we talk about kind of making the athlete having a single hip joint and trying to reduce human movement down to having a single joint and treating the hip like the only axis of rotation, it really helps me to think about kind of creating stabilized long levers and maximizing mechanical advantage. Well, it's the same as the opposite is true too. If I could nail down maybe doing a handstand push-up, then the shoulder becomes the only joint, and I want to try to minimize how many kind of movements happen through the rest. So if that's the case, and if we look at even a movement like a ring dip, it's really analogous that when I'm balanced in position over the rings, the forearm really ends up, when I'm in a good position, the forearm is pretty vertical. Same thing on the push-up. And so that looks almost like a very vertical shin. And so it helps my thinking sometimes if I can just flip it up. And if this is the forearm, and then this is the calf, well, we've already worked on opening our calves, and we worked on some ideas about opening ankles. Well, maybe we can use some of that ankle mobility stuff to open up our wrists. It can be the same thing, so that this becomes a big old meaty calf, and then this just becomes a ankle joint. So take a look at this. I get a lot of complaints from beginners, as we always do, that, hey, it really hurts my forearms when we front squat, and absolutely it hurts the wrists, and certainly any challenged, strange position can definitely do that. Close that joint off, get into a close, big approximation. That hurts, especially when we see that athletes don't have the good rack position where I have enough range of motion where I can get the shoulder back and externally rotated. Then the poor little wrist ends up kind of being the downstream problem. So take a look at this. Obviously, we can do something very simple, is just contract, relax. So, if we don't respect our forearms, and our forearms tend to get really glued down, it's a very simple thing to just get them unglued. And as simple as, hey, I have a few minutes in the gym, and I'm going to lay my forearm down on the ground, and literally, I can just be peeling my knee back and forth through those tissues. I can be sitting at my desk, doing nothing. I can take my trusty pain ball, and I can make sure that I'm ungluing these things. So, first part of the MWOD today is I want you to see if you can collect a few minutes just reefing on the end corners of some of those tissues. They basically insert, a big mass kind of inserts on the elbow, another big mass inserts on the other side, but just see if you can unglue those things and make sure that those things are kind of supple and open. Very, very simple way, especially we've talked about this with that bachot, with the Chinese raking or the coining, but this can be done either way. That classically, you can think about that radius, and in this position, the arm is kind of organized in a certain way, with the radius, which is the thumb side and the ulna. And then when I flip my hand over, the bones actually cross. And so I have to create a lot of management of those tissues as the bones actually physically make an X here. And the kind of the tissue membrane that sits between the two bones is called the interosseous membrane. And if I can get in there a little bit between those bones as they cross here, and even just some of those tissues, it's very, very effective. And that stuff gets ropey. As Yami was talking about, even if we see the changes in external rotation, internal rotation. So we look at the whole system, especially when athletes are into a pull-up, chin-up position. And I asked you guys the other day to take a look at your internal rotation grip versus your external rotation grip, and you're probably really limited in this position. One of the downstream effects that I can buy some slack to my shoulders, making sure that I have full range of motion in my wrists. So you can absolutely contract, relax, all this stuff. And it can be simple as, hey, people complain about being in a forearm position, rack, hurt. Well, let's go ahead and contract, relax, 5 seconds on, 10 seconds off. But instead of just doing it through the fingers, really choke up on the hand. Take a look at this. Just like that ankle mobility piece we did, well, if I go ahead and take my trusty band, I can get some big distraction through the joint and restore that roll, slide, and glide of the joint. So I can load up the wrist. I can test, retest, of course. And my right wrist is pretty destroyed. I don't have some good cartilage here from so much kayaking. And I have a hard time really turning the wrist over and clearing it out. So I'm always working on extension on this wrist. So there's my test, retest, how well the wrist I can get my elbow pits forward, how I can pull the wrist back. And then as I load up the joint, I'm going to distract it in the opposite direction. It looks like our ankle mobility. So I've just pinned my hand down, anchor the hand right up near the base here. Can you see this, Juliet? Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to go ahead and just keep my arm straight, and I'm going to fold forward. And because I'm getting this nice line of force pulling back on those carpal bone interface of the into the forearm, I get this really nice, feels like a big capsular stretch, in which opens up this part of the wrist. And if I just hang out here and oscillate back and forth, I can certainly contract, relax there too. If there's a muscular component, that will resolve. Tight, 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 release. I can open that up a little further. Tight, 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 release. And I'm going to get some gapping here. I'm going to get some distraction in the joint, but it's very, very effective. And you'll find that you can actually access some ranges that you might not feel you would have comfort with. And then you can test, retest, and see significant improvement in kind of the range and the quality of that motion. So let's try that today. Then, I also want to just talk about, this is the hodgepodge piece, is at the bottom of the thoracic spine. We see a lot of the interfaces of cervical spine into thoracic spine. By definition, thoracic spine is where your ribs are. Those interfaces tend to be hard on these C6 and 7 joints. And this is where people do a lot of hinging, a lot of destruction of their joints, C6, 7. And that, this interface ends up being really stiff and nasty, and also the interface of this kind of TL junction, the thoracic lumbar junction, that a lot of people try to do a good job stabilizing their lumbar, but just end up hinging at T12. If you look at a lot of the really flexible CrossFit athletes, oftentimes they really get a lot of kind of big hinging. What we're after is about global extension through the whole spine, so including that thoracic spine, one continuous piece into the lumbar spine instead of a tilting of the rib cage. Remember, that rib cage tilt is what happens when I don't squeeze my butt and control my pelvis, and I'm broken from this side. Everything kind of goes to hell in a handbag. So what I want to make sure is that, hey, maybe I need to spend some time on this TL junction. We usually hammer the upper thoracic spine, but I'm going to go ahead and take my balls today, get it in that TL, so the bottom of the rib cage, where it starts to come into the lumbar there. And a lot of the hippie trippy Jean-Claude West and all the dancers and all those guys love to talk about the TL junction. It's the magic place where the psoas stops and the lats insert down there, and you kind of end, everything kind of ends, and you get this big kind of weak hinge moment. So, but those pieces and the areas get pretty nasty sometimes. That's the insertion of the quadratus lumborum. The QL inserts in that area. So let's just spend a little bit of time much lower down and just kind of camp out the bottom of the rib cage, and then move into that a little bit and just see if you can get some movement in some of those joints. So I'm just kind of rolling around, and then conversely, I'm just going to roll out to the side and hit the ribs off there. So I'm not on the spine now, I'm just in the ribs off the side, and the ribs get stiff down there, and as that rib is stiff, sometimes I can't do a good job of recruiting lower traps, lower lats, and so I just think about making sure I'm opening up this kind of lateral flank. And classically, my favorite thing, diagnosis in the world, is old term flank pain. Let's get into the human flank here. So, toy with the wrists. Let's get you ungluing the forearms here. And I want you to spend some time on the QL. And then because we're going to be on one side, we might as well come onto the other side. So it's a useful model analogy that I'm looking at both sides of the joint, which means that I should be talking to my psoas. So either take the kettlebell, let's drive it in, or at least get on your stomach and let's work on that psoas from the other side. And thinking about the insertion of that psoas, maybe its highest fiber levels is literally at the first lumbar vertebra level or just a little bit higher, and then just see if you can make a relationship, a correlation to being stiff in there. And I've noticed that I'm pretty high up, I'm well above my belly button, but I'm in the range of where that kind of that QL or that TL junction, that thoracic lumbar junction. All right, so we're going to just monkey with some of this business, monkey with some of that business. Let's try to go after some wrist flexibility issues so we can improve our rack position and unglue the forearms. Heading to Norway this week. We're going to see Yami over there. We're going to see some crazy Norse amazing peoples. I'm sure I'm going to make an IKEA joke in the near future. Hang tough. Make sure you've got a good supply of Swedish fish, and we'll see you tomorrow.